Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Partha Bhattacharya. I'm passed out from IIT Kharagpur and spent a large part of my career with State Bank of India and more than a decade with corporate sector. I have the privilege of moderating this very, very interesting and topical session, a theme of which is banking sector reform in India and how do we go forward with the next generation reforms and other related things in the banking sector and create flow to the MSME, etc. and trade flow. So I have a very distinguished panelist. I'll introduce you, Mr. Padma Kumar, who is introduced to all of you. Mr. Padma Kumar is a CGM of Stressed Asset Resolution Group, State Bank of India. Clearly, he's hands-on guy for this debate. And Ms. Ruchi Sharma, she is the Executive Director, Financial Services Advisory, PwC India. I have Mr. Sudhir Dole. All of you can raise your hand or say hi to everybody when I introduce all of you. Yeah, Mr. Sudhir Dole is CEO, Trade Information Network. Ketan Gaikwad, MD and CEO, Receivables Exchange of India, and Aishwarya Jaishankar, founder of Why Not Consulting. She's a real next generation person here who can talk us about what's lying ahead of us. I'll introduce you to the theme a little bit, background, and then ask some questions to my panelists, and we'll try to make it interactive. We'll welcome questions from the audience, maybe towards the end or in between. If you think this pertinent to ask a question, you can interrupt us, but we'd like to keep the question Q&A session towards the end of the session. That's the format. And I'll ask Mr. Padma Kumar first. He's into the thick of these things in what's in the banking sector. In this budget, there is a finance minister announced quite a few steps about what all she wants to do, the government wants to do, or the regulators want to bring in new wave of reforms in Indian banking sector. Some of them are some of the major things she announced are privatization of 2 public sector banks, setting up of a DFI, setting up a bad bank. These are some of the major things that she talked about. And we'll also ask you a little bit of, maybe in the second round, I'll ask about how SBI is handling its NPA portfolio and IBC, how it has helped, etc. First, I'll ask you the question on how do you see this bad bank concept? There is a lot of debate on this, whether it's good, bad, or ugly for decades, possibly. Finally, we have decided to go ahead with bad bank. Do you think it's what is your view on bad bank? And from the context, one challenge, one issue which has been talked about bad bank is, would it lead to some sort of leniency, laxity on the part of the bankers in supervision of the loan book? Will they you can have the option of dumping some bad asset to somebody else? Do I become a little lax in my control and supervision of my loans? Is that a possibility? Number one. Number two, possibly this is number two. Number one question possibly would be, what is the need of a bad bank when each bank, like State Bank of India, you are heading one of these stressed asset resolution group, and a very strong structure is there in most of the banks, public sector, private sector, across the board, for resolution of stressed asset. There are ARCs. So why do you need a bad bank separately, and what should be their capital, and is the capital provided is good enough for them to leverage on their strength and find a market for the sale of bad loans? Padma Kumar, please.
Yeah. Good afternoon to all the panelists. Good morning, good evening to. You can hear me very well? You can hear me?
Little bit disturbed, but go ahead. Please go ahead.
So you have a very interesting question to me. So the decision of the government to launch a bad bank is not because is any laxity or lack of commitment. Hello? You can hear me?
Yes, I think in between you muted yourself. Don't mute. You go ahead, please.
I can go to another place. Can you repeat it? Can you ask the question to another panelist and I will come back?
Okay.
I'll just switch the internet actually.
Okay. I'll ask Ruchi some question about this NPA, which I thought Mr. Padma Kumar, I'll ask him first and then come to you. But meanwhile, you can ask this. NPA has a history of also related malfeasance, diversion of funds, frauds, etc. Almost part and parcel of some of the NPAs. I mean, real, genuine business failure NPAs are there. How to distinguish between these business related business failure of a corporate or for other reasons? There is one related question on this privatization of public sector bank. One, real or imaginary, possibly quite real, having worked in SBI, this fear of investigating agencies, questioning your error of judgment in retrospect. After years or decades also, somebody can be hauled up, senior executives can be hauled up for decision taken. Although a lot of things have happened and de-risked, the bankers have de-risked themselves through committee approach, through detailed process. SOPs are very well laid down, SOPs are there. So to that extent, this risk is reduced to some extent, but there is a fear of being questioned subsequently investigating. And one theory is that sort of restricts the public sector bankers from taking bold credit decisions or even resolution decisions. Not only credit decision, one-time settlement resolution time. Would you take the haircut outside IBC? This is one point I'll ask Mr. Padma Kumar when he's back. I mean, outside IBC, no bank was willing to take any haircut. And you look at 4,000 odd cases in IBC, more than 1/4 of 1,000 odd cases have gone for liquidation, where you have taken almost, negligible recovery was there. 95% or more haircut has been taken. Could these companies be saved? Could these assets created, jobs created by these companies could be saved if the banks would have taken haircut in advance when it was possible, even without going to IBC? This question is a very difficult question to answer, but I would like you to highlight how sort of a prior information about diversion of funds or malfeasance by any corporate, how banks can get benefit of that and save the business, save the banker's balance sheet. Can you elaborate on what PwC does in this area?
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Bhattacharya, and fairly pertinent question. I think NPA is one area which our banking sector has been reeling for a very long time. A lot of good steps have been taken in the past, especially with IBC coming into force, which kind of formalizing this whole process of how to manage what has already gone into NPA, and with the bad bank coming into play, with the ARC and AMC also being established. I think a large amount of NPA which are already there, I think they will kind of at least be able to resolve a large part of it and should be able to clean a lot of the whatever is already a bad debt or an NPA. So during a lot of the work that we have done, and we have been working alongside a lot of the consortiums of the bank in investigating some of these very large cases where pretty clearly it has come to the fore that it was a sort of a very intent-driven diversion of fund. So a lot of time it has been seen that not the market forces, and not because of certain genuine business decisions have been taken or certain environmental issues, there has been a total an NPA. A lot of time the NPA has been seen because the parties have taken the funds out of to their related parties, and what we have seen that there's also, it's a fairly convoluted nexus of these either shell companies or these companies which are related party and with the related entities, and how the funds kind of are being diverted to these related entities under a lot of related party transactions, which may not have even happened, right? So I think one of the key challenges which the banks are facing today is like, how do they track their own money? Once you have kind of given once you have kind of given the money, how do you go ahead and start tracking that money on a fairly as in not like on live basis, but as soon as possible? How do you kind of ensure that before the money is taken out, or before the actual an asset goes into an NPA definition of a 90-day default, can there be a process where you can get an early warning to say that, okay, you might want to look into this account, and there could be certain red flags which kind of are coming in, and one needs to kind of look into certain things with more scrutiny than the otherwise, And one thing is in place, and can there be and there are technology, can there be like a fund trail process that can be put in place as to if you have kind of taken the money? I mean, if there are a lot of related party transactions from that account, then that could be a red flag. That why there are so many related party transactions. Also, and another important thing is also like how good is the due diligence before on the borrower before the money is before the loan is given. A lot of time this has also been seen that not enough due diligence was done. A lot of time, again, I won't say that the public sector banks are not bold enough, because we see like these days they are kind of have, they are the largest lenders in our country right now as well. But I think sometimes what like it is also could be, I would say sometimes, lack of awareness, and also sometimes lack of even manpower sometimes. And we have seen it. There's a lack of manpower when it comes to even due diligence or certain compliance related work. So that also needs to be pretty stringent. I mean, before you even decide to part away the money and give it to the borrower, what kind of due diligence is being done? What kind of, have you gone into the history? Have you seen that what kind of related parties, though I might have kind of declared my related parties, but are these the only one? And it's not very difficult to kind of check that. In fact, during the reforms also, it has been emphasized that there should be a more transparent way of due diligence of the borrowers, where a more third-party information can also be utilized to kind of gain knowledge. So these couple of things are kind of become very critical, because NPA is one of the big stressor for the banking sector in India. And addressing this will help really a lot for the banks to even gain confidence, and also kind of relieve the stress on their capital requirements as well.
I mean, prevention is a better
system. Yes, absolutely.
You can prevent and have some early warning system, as you said, it would be helpful to the lenders.
Yes.
Mr. Padma has come back. So Padma Kumar, coming back to the same question, and maybe I'll have a follow-on question. What I asked Ruchi, I'll get your views before we move to others. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, am I clear right now, sir?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm in a better position than where I was earlier. Good. Your question was a very long question, actually. There are no short answers to that big question of yours. So kindly permit me to explain the whole thing in detail. The point is that the bad banks, the very purpose that the bad bank has been launched is not because there has been any laxity on the part of the bankers in managing the stress asset portfolio as of today. Now, there will be lending in this country. When there are lending in this country, there are bound to be some bad assets, actually. So that is pretty inevitable process. So that process is something which has been going on for a long time. We have been managing reasonably well. So as we move forward, capital becomes very critical for a banker, actually. The more the capital which is available for the banker, the more he can possibly lend it out. Now, all this capital, imagine if all this capital is stuck up in non-performing assets, then it becomes very difficult for the banks to pursue not only the commercial targets, but social targets, which are pronounced by the government and the Parliament of India. So having said that, now the best way we have explored multiple ways how to deal with it. Like for State Bank of India, you have a provision coverage ratio is about close to 90%, which is substantial. So now we are not very concerned about that point. We proactively engage with the regulators and proactively engage with all stakeholders, ensure that the coverage is substantial. Now, having said that, the time has now come where all these assets which are stressed as on today need to be aggregated at a particular level. Now, what is the importance of aggregation? Now, it has to be restructured, it has to be made into a good running asset at the end of the day, or it has to be sold to somebody. It could be a strategic investor, it could be a financial investor, it could be anyone. But at some point of time, the bankers would realize that they want a good value for this asset actually. So aggregation becomes very important. Now, if one is say in a consortium, we have seen consortium as big as 50 bankers involved in it. Just imagine the chaos that can happen within that 50-member consortium. Forget about it, even 2-3 people in your own home, you're not able to manage. Imagine 50 bankers with diverse interests, spreading all geographies, actually sitting in a consortium. Classic example is Reliance Communication, this in which we had almost close to 50 lenders sitting in a massive consortium. We had to hire a marriage call to conduct the consortium meetings actually. So now having said that, so now if all of us are able to sell this to a particular single entity, that entity will bring in the necessary focus, attention, professionalism to run an asset and turn it around and then probably sell it to interested parties at a value which probably could be much better than what the individual's bank would gain. So from that point of view, the launch of the BAD Bank is absolutely timely, critical, and it will move as envisaged by the government. So we are completely supportive of the government efforts. Actually, hopefully we will have the launch of the bank coming very soon, probably the beginning of this probably new financial year or end of this financial year. So these are matter of detail, but then it's a very timely exercise. So this is as far as the BAD Bank is concerned. Now, earlier concern is that whether the bankers have done a due diligence to ensure that the loans are given at the collecting at the time when it was given. All due diligence is something which is ingrained in every banker. We do it. Now, if there are some errors which can happen in due diligence. Now, policy changes can emerge subsequently, and then if all those things affect external as well as internal, if it affects, it is a normal process actually. I haven't seen any loan which has gone bad because something serious has been committed. There could be 1 or 2 exceptions, but generally what happens is that it is external or internal factors. Controllable or not controllable is not the point which we discussed today, but nevertheless there has been some developments which happened which made the account distressed. So now going forward, the underwriting standards have to improve. And once you aggregate all these things and put it across into another entity, that will free massive amount of capital to the banks, and banks can go ahead and then probably lend it to more productive sectors. The focus would bring back to the bank for their primary focus of primary job of lending into commercial sectors. Over to you, Parthu.
Thank you very much for that perspective. BAD Bank is a good idea. Yes, and especially the point you made about the aggregation and the professionalism. Hopefully there will be also secondary market for the bad loans also, which is there in other developed countries. Eventually that will also happen. So that would be a good idea. I'll come back to you on two other important questions about NPA and also about privatization of public sector banks. And my other panelists, some of them may have some questions for you also, like on DFI, etc. I'll move to Ketan first. Ketan, I mean, we all of us know that India is one of the mostly very underbanked economy. Mid 50% or so, 56% or so is the credit to GDP ratio compared to, forget about the developed country, but even developing countries also have better credit GDP ratio. And without improving that, economy really cannot get out of the orbit that we are circling for a long time now. So improving credit GDP ratio, or another thing Mr. Padmakumar just now told, that ability for the banks to have adequate capital to be able to lend to the productive sector. The words he used are productive sector. So one of the most important sector is MSME sector. I mean, they are the people who create not only the supply chain, also is ensured. So it has linkage to including inflation possibly, and also job creation. Two important things the regulators and lawmakers look at to control. So to influence. I think they are also starved of the credit. There is a huge credit gap globally and in India also. So maybe since you are in the trade finance area and MSME sector, would you elaborate on what all new technology can do, or what all are being done in the country to help the MSME sector financing, improve the financing of MSME.
Yeah, so thank you, Partha, and thank you, Mr. Padma Kumar, for a wonderful insight on the bad banks. So when I talk about the MSMEs, when we talk about MSMEs, this is the most underbanked sector as per the latest report of IFC. It says that 250 billion is the credit gap which is there, and how is it being solved? And if you look at the COVID scenario, we have seen that the credit offtake from the MSMEs has been much more. In fact, as per the CIBIL report, it has gone up by 5% more. In fact, it's gone to from 2.1 to 5.4% or something like that. When we talk about it, the challenges are multiple as far as the MSMEs are concerned, and the existing processes of the banks, some of the banks, it's quite manual, or it's quite dependent on the human intervention, like sourcing, underwriting, monitoring, and repayment collection. This all tends to be manual, and that's where a lot of fintech companies are coming and trying to give a value add over there, how that space can be digitized. And we have seen a lot of MSMEs doing the work over there, where the banks are working together with the MSMEs. In fact, when we look at something like they're removing the asymmetry which is there. If you look at the MSMEs, a lot of MSMEs are not able to take loans because of the fact that their loans are into the informal sector. So when you talk about the MSMEs, the loans go to the owners, or rather the owners take the loan, and that does not get recorded as an MSME loan in the system. So that is something which the sectors are working on, the fintech sectors are working on. And primarily it's been, the fact remains that with the lot of formalization which is happening in the sector, especially when I talk about formalization, we can talk about GSTN, we can talk about the GSTN coming into play, and where the invoices are coming onto the platform, onto the GSTN network. At the same time, Udyog Aadhaar and many things like account aggregators are coming. So in India, when you talk about the fintech sector, which is expanding, many areas are being looked upon by the fintech sector, especially in terms of getting the GSTN invoices, getting you can by going into the GSTN itself, we can get a whole lot of data, who are the top suppliers, who are the top buyers. When you look at digitizing many things, where bank statements are digitized, and then you can get a complete history of the entire credit history of that particular buyer or that particular seller. Then you have the credit bureau records, you have the insurance details. A lot of ecosystem is being in works. In fact, if you look at the account aggregator network, when you talk about the account aggregator network, you talk about getting all this financial data into the system. And when you have the financial data into the system, then you talk about automation of the processes, that you can establish the digital identity of the client, you can do the digital signing of the client, you can do the due diligence of the client, you can do the underwriting, especially when you have the complete credit data in terms of GSTN data and the bank statements, and that is what is being worked upon. And one of the biggest development which has happened in the last 2-3 years is about TReDS development. So TReDS has come into the play, wherein that MSMEs have a perennial problem, where when they supply to the large corporates or large PSUs, the attitude is always about patronizing attitude from the large corporates, saying that we'll decide when you supply to us, but we'll decide when we want to make the payment to you, and that continues. And when the study was carried out, it was found that 70% of the MSMEs don't receive the payment on time, and sometimes they end up losing, they end up writing it off. So that's where TReDS comes into play. So where you have the three parties onto the platform, which is the buyer, seller, and the financiers, and they can come and they can you upload the invoices get accepted, and then the payment gets made. So I would say that, look, in terms of the account aggregator network, and there is something which is we worked upon, where many banks are working upon with a concept called as Open Credit Enablement Network, which is called as OCEN in short, which talks about democratization of the credit, and you get a digital data access to all the data of Janam Kundli of that MSMEs and in any part of the India. And when that is done, then the credit can be an easy accessible credit which can be given to the MSMEs. So that is what is an important development which is being worked upon, I would say.
I think this is a next generation reform that we need in use of technology and information symmetry. One very interesting point, I think this also will eventually lead to cash credit, the funny cash credit system of working capital finance going and being replaced by bill discounting finance in India.
So I would tell you that, I forgot to mention that, there is a whole, there is with this democratization, what is happening is the discussion which is on now is whether we should move from balance sheet lending to cash flow lending. That is exactly, I think you were alluding to, Mr. Partha.
Yeah. I'll move to Sudhir. So Sudhir, I mean, you have this one very critical point following from what Mr. Ketan told us, that there is one, I think, gap apart from the credit gap, information gap. There's a lot of information asymmetry which the MSMEs suffer. They don't know which is the best, which is offering, what area they are concentrating on, what sector-wise risk profile, risk appetite is there for which bank, and what sort of products the banks are offering quite often, and what sort of due diligence of the big corporate who have the credit defaulting on the payment or delaying the payment. Those sort of information are just not available. Your network, would it be able to help bridge this information asymmetry?
Thank you, Partha, and thank you for the opportunity to be at GTR India with a very great panel here. Some very interesting thoughts expressed by all the panelists, and I'll try to relate to some of these thoughts as I outline what exactly Trade Information Network does and what it tries to address. So I was a banker for 27 years before I moved into this company. So I fully understand that it's extremely challenging for bankers to fill this gap of the funding to the MSMEs. And why are bankers worried about this? Why don't they jump into it? So we need to understand that, right? That's the problem definition. And that's what we are trying to solve here. So essentially, there are various pain points as to why bankers are hesitant to lend to the MSME sector. And we aim to address about 3 of these pain points. The first risk, which is the big risk, and I think which Ruchi also talked about, is really fraud risk. Fraud risk is a big thing. Of course, you can do your due diligence and so on, which is extremely important. First thing, as Mr. Padma Kumar was saying, the first thing we learned as bankers when we started our careers is due diligence. So how do you really address this issue of fraud risk at a transaction level? And that's what we are trying to do here. So typically, let's say that you have a supplier or an exporter coming to a bank and saying, here is my pre-shipment, here's my purchase order, please give me pre-shipment credit. Now, as a bank, you don't know whether that's a genuine purchase order, is it fraudulent? How do you get yourself comfortable? So what happens on our platform is that the data for the purchase order does not come from the supplier, as it traditionally does. It comes from the buyer, the original source, the company which has actually placed the purchase order. Now that completely removes the risk because you're getting it from the golden source. So to give you an example, if you have an exporter in Tirupur and you have the buyer as Walmart, instead of the exporter giving it to you in Tirupur, you're getting the purchase order from Walmart, right? So that big risk is now out of the way. The second big risk, which again, I think Ruchi mentioned, is double financing risk, right? That diversion of funds risk, which happens, and you don't know whether your exporter is going and taking funding from multiple banks. How do you prevent that? So in our platform, once a purchase order or an invoice is financed, it cannot be financed for a second time. That's of course, we have that check. And of course, people can go outside the platform, but once the platform becomes an industry standard, then you have a situation in which you can avoid the double financing kind of a problem. And the third big element I want to talk about is again coming to the early warning signals and the importance of data, which you talked about, right? Typically, when you look at a MSME or SME, you look at balance sheet lending, you get the data, but you get the data late. You get the financial statements by the time they come, and by the time you analyze it, it's late. And you don't even know whether the quality of the financials are something you can rely on. That's another big concern that you have as a banker. So on our platform, you'll have a lot of data. For example, you'll know whether the goods have been shipped on time, whether there are credit dilution notes raised by the buyer to say that there are quality issues with the supplier, And looking at all this data, as a banker, you can develop an early warning system based on real-time data, which will enable you to solve the problem and be much more alert than what you are today to probable problems which are emerging. So really, when you look at our platform, it was designed by 6 global banks, which is ANZ, BNP, Citi, Deutsche Bank, HSBC, and Standard Chartered, to address this global problem. So it's not an India problem. We are not alone in this problem. The whole world and many emerging markets are obviously facing the similar challenge. So these banks got together to see how we can address this. And we're obviously, very interested in the Indian market because we believe that we can provide a solution. And coming to the point which you also mentioned about the regulator also being concerned about end use of funds. And as just something else I want to talk about finally as my last point is that typically you have been giving the cash credit facility, right? And you don't know the end use of funds, you have a problem of tracing the funds. Once you start shifting from a general cash credit facility to a specific purchase order or a order facility linked to a particular order or a particular invoice, you're in a much better position. And that's what also our platform facilitates. So, essentially we are trying to plug the gap, address regulatory concerns, and make sure funding reaches these MSMEs much more easily.
Thank you very much. I'll come to Aishwarya. As your name of your startup suggests, why not tell us about what you can offer to the MSMEs and the banking industry and how you're leveraging technology in the finance field?
So, Parthu, I am a banker, more a retail banker, but fundamentals of credits don't change either ways, right? What Sudhir just was explaining to us is the beautiful way technology can address the risks with mitigants, right? That was the heart of the conversation of what he was telling us about. And as somebody who's launched some fantastic banking products over the last 10 years, I really think the way bankers have adapted to or adapting to technology has undergone a fundamental shift. We have moved from the era of physical collaterals, physical documentation to eKYC, e-underwriting and whatnot, right? While we can keep talking about the need to adapt to all this, let's remember, fundamentally being bankers, all of us know that we are going to be risk averse, which is where institutionalized push, regulatory nudges are very important. And I would say we've been very happy to have an ecosystem that has enabled it. I'm talking about 5 years back, whereas retail bankers, we were told push cashless payments, push cashless payments. It took a UPI, right? It took certain institutionalized reforms to make that happen. And today UPI has hit over $1 billion in volume. Now, hearteningly, even on the trade finance side, what I'm seeing happening is the same trend playing out. The regulator is not just saying make cash flow payments a reality, but he is also ensuring that you are having the right set of tools to enable it, be it the trade invoicing discounting platform, be it the GST enablement, be it OCAN and account aggregation platform that Ketan spoke about. What we are seeing is a structured nudge towards embracing technology, because being bankers, it is not very easy. It is not in our skin to start doing the next cool technology on day one, which is where regulatory nudges play a big role. And I see that happening a lot. The second trend that I love from what Sudhir said is that I am very confident that finance is not going to be the place where trade goes to, but it will be the finance happening at the point of trade. Let me just give you an example. The Walmart example that Sudhir was talking about, or imagine a reseller on an e-commerce platform. Who's the absolute source of truth about information for this guy? That person should ideally be the origination for the finance for that guy, because we did speak about a lot of stress indicators, right? We are talking about willful defaulters. We are talking about bad underwriting. We are talking about lack of due diligence. All that gets mitigated when finance is offered at the point of trade, which is another trend that will definitely play out, Partho. We are seeing it in, what should I say, bits and pieces quite a lot, right? In retail, it has started happening. It's Google Pay, which is offering a credit cards. So embedded finance will be a reality. We'll definitely see it play out in a bigger fashion in future. And you will see that banks won't have a choice but to embrace it. because once technology is available, credit has to become democratized. It will follow. And when you have contextualization of data, when I know who you are from what you do, why do we go for an employment verification for a personal loan? That's the equivalent that will happen here in trade as well. And we are seeing what should I say, structured tools by the regulator to enable it. So it won't be very far away that every player in the ecosystem can also be a loan service provider who has partnered with a NBFC or a bank in the back end, and access to credit not only gets democratized but gets far more credible in terms of the way you can underwrite and in terms of you managing the book better, collection techniques. Let's just imagine the same thing. You're going back to the place where the LSP was and trading there. Isn't that the best place for you to collect? So I'm thinking that the combination of regulatory nudge and new age technology should completely help us rewrite the way trade finance is being done.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think there is a question come up which I'll ask Mr. Padmakumar to address very quickly, taking on from what Ketan, Sudhir and Aishwarya talked about. Do the banks think fintech is a competition and a threat to the traditional banking business? Quick answer to that before I ask you a little more complex question about NPA.
Can you repeat it, please? I didn't hear it properly.
Do the banks, traditional banks, incumbent banks, do they consider fintechs as a potential threat or a competition? A question, somebody from audience has asked a question on that.
No, not at all. In fact, anybody who enables the products to be delivered efficiently, it adds value. So at the end of the day, these are all to be done together. It's not that the bankers are perfect in every sense of the term. Actually, there are imperfections galore, and we try to do it perfectly all the time. But then, if someone comes and says that I have understood the whole process and probably much better than you, and I have a product which will help you deliver these products to the ultimate users more efficiently, come join the bandwagon, and then we will deliver it together. So what happens is that at the end of the day, if I'm able to deliver something which is probably a shade less riskier than what I was doing earlier, obviously we would welcome that actually. So it has been the history worldwide, and it is in a much wider scale, it is getting adopted in India. So all these things are natural progressions which happen as the banks actually widen their net. And at the end of the day, we also want to get the maximum returns from what we lent out actually. Now, if fintechs are going to help us realize the target, then obviously it is absolutely welcome when we do that endeavor. We welcome that actually.
I think it will be a collaborative effort between fintech and the traditional banks, and possibly co-opetition would be the right way to move forward. I have two questions. I think we are running out of time, but two questions, and Padmakumar, if you can address one or two. One is, of course, the privatization of banks. In a free market economy, honestly, I mean, ownership, we should be ownership agnostic. I think, I mean, not very important who owns. But on a very lighter vein, and it should not be taken as any insult to any sector. In the US election recently, when they used to campaign, Obama doing the phone banking. The word phone banking was a word, and it has a totally different connotation in India, especially for public sector banking, at least in some sector on a lighter or serious way in either way. That possibly may not be totally true. I personally feel it's very rarely that sort of influences in banks' decisions are not influenced because of these factors most of the time. There may be rare occasions when it has happened. And I have personally, I feel that bankers, public sector bankers have character and the strength to stand up to such phone banking anyway. But having said that, if ownership is not the issue, capital can be one issue. Capital from the government can be issued. So privatization of public sector banks has been talked about for decades. If I remember, Yashwant Sinha talked about in '99 budget about bringing it down to 33%. We have taken 20 more years and 50 years plus to undo what was done in '70s. So do you think that's a step forward?
So privatization, we have had a lot of private banks which were there earlier, like Global Trust Bank. I think none of the panelists and many of the people who are now listening to this probably would not have forgotten the GTB saga once upon a time, actually, this Global Trust Bank. So number point is that is not a panacea for everything. Now, if you have very successful stories like HDFC and then ICICI turned from a DFI to a morphed into a bank. So there are multiple cases and all of them are very, very successful actually. And they are so successful that the HDFC's market capitalization is apparently right now is far higher than even State Bank of India. So, but looking at it from a perspective of capital being infused to these banks actually, so I think probably the government feels that this is the right and appropriate time to take a step which would probably bring the government stake in these banks to below 50%, and then probably explore possibilities whether these would actually emerge as successful models going forward. Actually, it is an experiment. It's very early to say how that would pan out actually, but there are no right and wrongs in this. There is no harm in trying out as well. So there are about a few banks which probably are not merged with the other banks as of now. So they are now on a standalone basis. Now, whether an approach which would probably emerge going forward is something which we will look forward with keenness. And obviously there will be, it will be positive for sure. I mean, too early for us to predict which way it is going, but nevertheless, it has to be beneficial to the country and to the economy.
Right. And on one more question on the NPAs and especially on the infrastructure funding, and I think Sudhir also had a similar question on DFI, setting up DFI, would be will have the ability to not have the asset liability mismatch constraint that the commercial banks have for funding long-term assets as such, which the commercial banks are doing, and especially in absence of any corporate bond market, which would have been the ideal platform for funding of long-term assets, in special infrastructure, high credit risk, project execution period risk being the highest sort of thing. There's no corporate bond market. So commercial banks are filling that gap for the timing, creating pressure on their loan quality and also asset liability mismatch. So how does SBI tackle this issue? Number one, and especially I have working for some infra company. I can tell you one of the major challenges we face and the banks face is inordinate delay in release of funds by the government agencies. I keep telling that I keep feeling that if they would have released funds on time to the infra companies, they would have they don't need to recapitalize the public sector banks. Honestly, that is one of the biggest bottleneck, and I'm sure banks are talking to the ministry. And I think recently NHAI saw that they will release funds direct to the banks, etc. So, what are the 2-3 points you can mention? Because I think we have only 2 minutes left. So, GTR, unless they permit us to extend the time, you can keep it short. A difficult question.
So point over here is you struck the right part. So in the case of infrastructure space, the government has to be very clear. Now, whenever the policy has to be consistent and it has to be uniform throughout the project period. Now, like for example, if you take a road project actually. So now generally what used to happen is about 30 to 40% of the acquisition of the land is complete, and the banks are encouraged actually at that point of time to lend to that particular project. And it was under the assurance that the remaining acquisition of 60% would be completed in no time. Now the point is that the banks get in at 40% acquisition, then it drags on endlessly, and then ultimately, the result is pretty obvious actually. Now you look at even the power plants. You move from the road, you go to the power plants. Power purchase agreements actually are entered into. There are no long-term power purchase agreements. They're all short-term power purchase agreements. And they are all abrogated at whims and at the whims of the discoms actually at some point of time. Now, these are things which will probably be very disconcerting to a banker once the loan is sanctioned. So from a banker's perspective, these kind of inadequacies have to be addressed on a real-time basis. There are multiple efforts which have happened from the government side to address these matters, and pretty happy that Ministry of Surface Transport as well as the other ministries, Power Ministry, have taken enormous steps to move in the right direction. Are they perfect in that sense today? May not be, but at least the direction is positive actually. And the bankers too have learned substantially from these failures. And going forward, they will probably be looking into this experience from these failures to fund further infrastructure. It's not that it is not going to be funded, but it would be. But taking into account the past experiences which the bankers have accumulated.
Thank you. One question from the audience I'll address to Sudhir, or Ketan also can join in later. Do you see that trade credit insurance, if allowed by IRDA, will assist the bankers to finance SMEs with more confidence?
Yes.
Sudhir, yes.
Sorry. Yeah, trade credit insurance helps, but I think at the end of the day, the banker has to be comfortable with the underlying credit. He cannot rely just because there is a credit insurance. That's what I learned as a banker, like I said, for so many years, right? It's the intrinsic credit which is very important. I'll hand it over to Ketan because there's
in fact, Sudhir, if you know that credit insurance is not yet started in India, it was stopped in 2010. So it's a positive development, and we see that it'll add on to the transactions which are coming, because at the end of the day, I agree that it's the intrinsic credit internally that matters. So you just cannot take a bad credit and cover it up with an insurance and expect the banks to finance it. But that's something which is being worked upon, and honestly, I mean that's something we expect the IRDA to come out with guidelines on that. But right now, they have allowed sandbox testing on the TReDS platform. On our platform, we are doing the testing for a credit insurance company, insurance company, to see whether the financing can happen on invoice level itself. So that's, we feel that it's a development which is in the positive step. It's a positive step for the industry, and that then the fallout of that would be the credit insurance for the financiers, which can be allowed, for the banks, which can be allowed, which was stopped a long time back. So we feel that the offtake will be a better, financiers will take a call on that.
Ruchi, just to wrap up a sentence or two. We have run out of time already. GTR, I'm sure, is getting a little unhappy with us extending our time.
Sure, Bada. No, in wrap up, I agree with all the panelists, and I think I was not saying that there's no due diligence or there's no monitoring happen, but I'm saying that there's a requirement for enhancing it, because what we have seen is that there are still certain aspects which are totally not institutionally, but there are certain things which can be caught on very easily, very early on. So that's it, and I think we are at the right path as a country for the financial sector. I think some great steps being taken by the regulator and by our government. So yeah, all the best to all of us.
Thank you. Aishwarya?
I think, Partho, like I said, we are in the age where trade is going to rule, right? I mean, we are going to see more of data, we are going to see more of context, and we are definitely going to see more of quality credit getting accessible. So all of it, like Ruchi said, I think should sound good for the economy, because if trade flourishes, we all flourish. I mean, that's how that's the impact it has on GDP.
Thank you very much. Just to sum up a few points, 2 points, I would say that having heard a seasoned banker like Padma Kumar and trade finance specialist, and from PwC, fraud prevention advisory group type of thing, and the next generation entrepreneur like Aishwarya, I think we have an environment has been created in the country by the lawmakers and the regulators for taking the economy right in the forward direction. We had a 2020 washout. So prior to 2020, also economy was not doing that well. So we have a challenge ahead. It's not going to be easy ride, but long haul flight definitely. But and a lot of headwinds also be there. But I think the environment is being created for economy to stabilize and move forward henceforth, and take a marriage of technology and traditional banking, learning of handling NPS, IBCs, all such things put together would take India forward for sure. That's a positive. On positive note, we are happy to conclude this session. This sort of topic, I think, requires a day-long discussion. Even then, there will be no end to this debate. But we have time constraint, and thank you very much, all my panelists and the participants, delegates who have been listening to us. And thank you, GTR. All the best to all of us, as Ruchi said.